Have you ever experienced sleep paralysis? It's a question that might send shivers down your spine if you've ever found yourself trapped in this sleep phenomenon. Sleep paralysis is a peculiar state of consciousness. It's where you find yourself unable to move or speak, trapped in a limbo between sleep and wakefulness. It usually occurs when you're drifting off to dreamland or just as you're about to embrace the morning sun. But it's not just the paralysis that makes this experience frightening. Often, it's accompanied by vivid hallucinations, both visual and auditory, that can be terrifyingly real. You might see shadowy figures, hear strange noises, or feel an intense pressure on your chest. And the worst part? You're immersed in a profound sense of dread, a feeling that something terrible is about to happen. Now, imagine being trapped in your own body, unable to move, with your worst fears playing out before your eyes. Meet our protagonist, a regular man with a regular life. This man, our central character, lives a life that could be described as ordinary. His days are filled with the usual hustle and bustle of work, family, and the occasional leisure time. He's a man of routine, a creature of habit, and there's comfort in the predictability of his life. He wakes up each morning, a cup of hot coffee in hand, and heads off to work at a local hardware store. His work, though not glamorous, brings him satisfaction. He likes the feel of tools, the smell of wood, the satisfaction of helping customers find just the right piece for their projects. After work, he heads home to his wife and 2 children. They are the light of his life, the core of his world. Evenings are spent helping with homework, playing catch in the backyard, or indulging in his wife's home-cooked meals. After tucking his children into bed, he and his wife share quiet moments, sometimes in front of the television, sometimes just talking about their day. It's a peaceful life, a content life. But there's a wrinkle in this normalcy. For a while now, our man has been suffering from sleep paralysis. He's been waking up in the middle of the night, unable to move, a sense of dread filling his heart. He's seen doctors, tried different remedies, but the paralysis persists. It's a shadow that hangs over him, a glitch in his otherwise regular life. You see, our man has always valued control, the ability to move, to act, to decide, but during these episodes, he's robbed of that control. These moments of immobility, of vulnerability, they scare him. But he's a strong man. He endures, he pushes through, he wakes up each morning and carries on with his life. Little did he know that one particular night would change his life forever. This night, like any other, would start off normal. But as we'll soon discover, it's going to end in a way he could never have anticipated. The sun went down, and the dreadful night began. As dusk gave way to the inky blackness of night, our man found himself settling into his usual evening routine. A hot, comforting shower that washed away the grime and grit of the day, a simple supper that filled his belly but didn't weigh him down, and finally, a favorite book that lulled his racing thoughts into a gentle hum. The final piece of this nightly ritual involved him tucking himself into bed, a quiet sanctuary from the world outside. That night, however, his sanctuary would turn into a prison. As he drifted off to sleep, his body began to betray him. His limbs grew heavy, his chest felt like it was being crushed under an invisible weight, and his mind was trapped in the terrifying limbo of sleep paralysis. He was conscious, but he couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't cry out for help. The feeling of dread that washed over him was palpable, like a cold, clammy hand gripping his heart. His breath came out in shallow gasps, each one a battle won against the paralyzing fear. And then the hallucinations began. In the periphery of his vision, shadows twisted and turned into grotesque shapes. They danced in the dim moonlight that filtered through his bedroom window, their movements jerky and unnatural. A whisper of a breeze stirred the curtains, and he could hear the faintest sound of laughter, cruel and mocking. It was as though his deepest fears were coming alive, taunting him, reveling in his helplessness. Each second felt like an eternity as he lay there, trapped within his own body. His eyes darted frantically around the room, trying to make sense of the horrors unfolding before him. But the more he struggled against the paralysis, the tighter its grip became. And then, just when he thought it couldn't get any worse, he heard a noise. Frozen in fear, he heard a noise that chilled his blood. A creaking, insidious sound echoed through the stillness of the night, like the groan of an ancient wooden ship swaying in a merciless sea. It was a sound that didn't belong in the familiar symphony of his home. He longed to leap from his bed, to confront whatever lurked in the shadows, but his limbs refused to obey. His body, held captive by an unseen jailer, was as still as a gravestone, his senses heightened in the cruel irony of his paralysis. The noise grew louder, more distinct. The soft scrape of something being dragged across the floor, the muffled thud of heavy footsteps. Each sound was a cruel stroke on the canvas of his imagination, painting a picture of a terror he could not see. His heart pounded in his chest, a desperate drum calling for help that would not come. His breath hitched as the sound drew closer. He could hear the hushed whispers of an unknown entity, its voice as cold and as hollow as forgotten tomb. The whispers danced around him, a macabre ballet of sound that teased his ears, yet remained just beyond his comprehension. The whispers were joined by a low, guttural growl, a sound that seemed to reverberate from the very depths of hell itself. The terror was palpable, a bitter taste on his tongue, a cold sweat on his brow. He longed to scream, to shatter the silence with his fear, but the icy grip of sleep paralysis held him in its ruthless grasp. His mind was a whirlwind of panic and helplessness, a prisoner in his own body, forced to endure the unseen terror that lurked in the shadows of his home. As the sounds grew louder, more insistent, he could do nothing but listen. Listen to the unseen terror that had invaded his sanctuary, that had turned his home into a house of horrors. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath ragged in his throat. He was trapped, unable to move as the terror unfolded before his eyes. When the sun finally rose, the man was released from his paralysis. Exhausted, he felt a rush of relief so profound it almost knocked him out again. The maelstrom of fear and anxiety that had held him captive all night had finally loosened its grip. His limbs, no longer bound by the invisible chains of sleep paralysis, trembled in the newfound freedom. His heart pounded like a drum in his chest, a staccato rhythm echoing his relief. He took a deep, shuddering breath, finally able to move, to breathe without the weight of an unseen terror pressing down on him. He had weathered the storm, survived the night, and lived to tell the tale. But as he gathered his strength to rise from his bed, the relief was quickly replaced by a creeping sense of dread. His eyes, now free to roam, took in the chaos that was his once neat and orderly room. It looked like a cyclone had swept through, leaving nothing untouched. His belongings were strewn about, a chilling testament to the terror that had stalked him in the night. His worst fears from the night before were confirmed. He wasn't alone. He hadn't been alone. The unseen terror was real. The evidence was right there in the disarray around him, a silent scream in the light of the new day. But amidst the chaos, he found strength. He had survived. He was alive. The unseen terror had not won. He was safe now, under the protective blanket of the morning sunlight, the unseen terror banished back to the shadows from whence it came. The man knew, though, that he would carry the scars of this night forever. The unseen terror might have retreated, but it had left its mark. The specter of sleep paralysis would always be lurking in the back of his mind, a chilling reminder of the night he was trapped in his own body, helpless against the unseen terror. He was safe now, but he knew he would never forget that night. The man's life was never the same after that night. His world was irrevocably altered, tainted with the lingering dread of the unseen. Sleep, once a refuge, became a battlefield. The man was trapped in a cycle of anxiety and fear, the mere thought of sleep paralysis enough to keep him awake. His nights were filled with a relentless apprehension, an unease that seemed to echo in the stillness. Desperate for relief, he sought help. Therapists and sleep specialists became his new allies in this battle against his own mind. They armed him with techniques to manage his condition, taught him how to wrestle control back from the terrifying grip of sleep paralysis. Gradually, he learned to cope, to live with the fear. He understood that his mind, while capable of creating terrifying scenarios, was also his greatest weapon. His story serves as a chilling reminder of the terrifying power of our own minds. Y'all, we're wrapping up here, but don't you go anywhere just yet. Show some love, hit that like button. Fancy more content like this? Go on, subscribe and let that bell icon ring so you won't miss a beat. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, sharing is caring. Until next time, stay tuned.